After undertaking this training, you'll be able to identify how to keep your patients safe with medical oxygen. You'll understand the reasons for undertaking this training. You'll be able to identify how to safely use, move and store cylinders and recognise the hazards. There are many regulations regarding the use of medical gases. The Royal Pharmaceutical Society states that persons authorised to handle medicines are accountable and comply with legal and registration frameworks, professional guidance and/or organisational or relevant national policy requirements. The Health and Safety at Work Act 1974 requires every employer to provide such information, instruction, training and supervision as is necessary to ensure, so far as is reasonably practicable, the health and safety at work of their employees. The Professional Codes of Conduct states that registrants must work within their scope of practice and must not administer any medication or use any equipment unless they're competent. The main regulations with medical gases are in the Health and Technical Memorandum 0201 or HTM 0201. This guidance states that the executive manager should ensure that all estates, nursing and medical staff have received this training before using the medical gas pipeline system, and that refresher courses are arranged. Induction training for any personnel who will be working with medical gases should also include the essential elements of medical gas safety and emergency actions. Medical oxygen is a drug which must be prescribed and signed for at drug rounds. The prescription will be either electronic or paper, and it's prescribed using an appropriate device to achieve a target saturation level rather than a specific device and flow rate. 95% of patients on oxygen should have a valid prescription. If the patient is critically ill, however, they must have 15 litres via a non-rebreathe mask, but the oxygen must be prescribed retrospectively. Giving routine non-emergency oxygen with no prescription is external to your code of conduct, which can lead to professional sanctions. There's an audit undertaken each year in Mid-Yorks to see how many patients are on oxygen and whether it's prescribed. Staff walk around every inpatient adult ward documenting who's on oxygen, the flow rate and the device. This is then compared with the patient's prescription and ppm+. The audit is published by the Trust's Audit Department. Each month a mini-audit is undertaken comparing data from ppm+ and e-meds. This data is fed back to the Medicines Optimisation Group, which is chaired by Dr. Ian Wilson. The British Thoracic Society guidelines are that 95% of patients on oxygen have a valid prescription, and 90% of patients with a prescription have oxygen signed for at the most recent drug round. Each month, the Organisational Development Department send the lead nurse for medical gases the data of who's completed this training. This data is fed into the Medical Gas Committee. The HTM 0201 states that 100% of staff who administer oxygen must be competent in its use and have this training refreshed annually. And all of the above data is analysed when we're visited by the Care Quality Commission. Have a think about where you work. Would your area meet these objectives? And if not, what could you do to increase the compliance? Do you have any idea what's the difference between these two cylinders? The oxygen cylinder which you see in clinical areas and the cylinder on the right. Physically, the gases are the same, except the medical gas is manufactured by a company who has a relevant licence to ensure that the gas is pure and traceable from the cylinder being filled at plant delivered to the hospital and returned to the manufacturer. Medical oxygen cylinders are either white with oxygen printed on the cylinder, or they're black with a white shoulder. When they're delivered from the British Oxygen Company, BOC, all medical gas cylinders have some form of tamper evidence seal, either a tear-off cover over the hand wheel, or a cellophane wrapper over the valve, or a push-off top cover over the valve. The smaller sized oxygen cylinders, CD, F and HX, are for patient transfer or emergency backup use. They're not designed for constant use, as they only have a limited amount of oxygen. The piped oxygen system will not run out. However, cylinders do. Cylinders come in various different sizes and weights. The smaller ones are easy to handle. However, the larger ones should only be handled by staff with specialist training. The J-size cylinder weighs nearly 80 kilos. Any idea what's in that cylinder on the right? What about the one on the left? The one on the right has oxygen in it. The one on the left? It's difficult to tell. So ensure that the cylinder is definitely the one that you want. Have a look at the collar and it will tell you what the contents of the cylinder is. There are many hazards of medical oxygen. It's oxidizing. No medical gases are flammable, however they support combustion. The more oxygen there is in an atmosphere, the more likely it is that materials will burn. For every 5% increase in oxygen, the chance of something catching fire doubles. Think of this when a patient leaves their oxygen mask on the bed, with the gas still flowing. Gases in a cylinder are under high pressure. They can be up to 300 bar. The regulator is what reduces the pressure in the cylinder to 4 bar, which is the safe pressure that we administer medical gases. Liquid oxygen is cold. It's stored at minus 183 degrees C. We've liquid oxygen delivered from BOC into the vacuum insulated evaporator. That's the 2 large white tanks on each site. It warms up as it travels through an evaporator, so that when it gets to the patient, it's no longer a cold liquid, it's a gas. There is more than one way to administer oxygen. Nasal cannula administer low flows of oxygen, enabling the patient to still be able to eat, drink and talk while still getting the prescribed therapy. Please ensure that they're not too tight and the prongs are in the nostrils rather than blowing oxygen into the eyes, forehead, chin or neck. A high concentration or non-rebreathe mask is generally used for patients who are critically ill. It delivers oxygen concentrations between 60 and 80%. Tracheostomy masks are designed so that they fit over the neck, but remember you may need to get one from another clinical area, but we do stock them. Venturi or fixed performance masks give a constant concentration of oxygen. They're colour-coded. The oxygen percentage and flow rate is printed on the venturi. If the flow rate is too low, the patient will not receive the amount of oxygen required. If the flow rate is too high, the patient will still only receive the percentage on the venturi. If your patient requires a higher percentage of oxygen, choose a different venturi. High-flow nasal oxygen is used within specialist areas to deliver higher flows of oxygen nasally. Studies show that it reduces escalation to non-invasive ventilation. It's well tolerated, especially as the patient can eat, drink and talk with it in situ. Non-invasive ventilation is breathing support through a tightly fitted mask or hood. Air, usually with added oxygen, is given under positive pressure. Flow meters should be checked regularly to ensure they are not damaged. First, have a look at it, check it's not broken and there are no loose parts. Check there's a nipple in place and it's white. Then push the flow meter into the oxygen terminal unit. Have a listen for any leaks. If you can hear a leak, put another flow meter in to see if the flow meter is faulty or the terminal unit. If the flow meter is faulty, send it to medical physics. If the terminal unit is faulty, do not use it. Maybe put a notice nearby to ensure that your colleagues don't use it. Report it to estates and organise another way for your patient to have oxygen. If there are no leaks, turn the oxygen on fully, checking the ball rises to the top of the flow meter. After 2 to 3 seconds, turn the flow meter off, taking care not to over-tighten. Flow meters can be cleaned using the green detergent wipes, but do make sure that the insertion probe does not get wet, and if it does, ensure that it is fully dry before use. Prior to using a medical oxygen cylinder, make sure that your hands are clean and any alcohol gels have evaporated. Check the cylinder's the correct one. Have a look at the collar. Does it say medical oxygen? Then look at the batch label. Is it in date? Is the cylinder in good condition and not damaged? If it's a new cylinder, remove the tamper evidence seal and activate the cylinder by turning the hand wheel clockwise fully. Then turn it slightly anti-clockwise. Have a look at the contents gauge. Have you enough gas for the journey? A full CD oxygen cylinder holds approximately 460 litres. If it's being administered at 2 litres per minute, it will last 230 minutes, or just under 4 hours. Once you're happy that the cylinder has enough gas in it for your journey, connect the oxygen tubing, be that green bubble tubing or the pre-packed single-use tubing. Double check that the cylinder's activated with the black hand wheel. Set the rate and then listen for at least 20 seconds to ensure the gas is flowing. Failure to do this can lead to severe harm or death. If the cylinder is not activated, you may still hear a hissing sound for around 5 seconds until the residual oxygen in the outlet is dispensed. To ensure the cylinder is turned on properly, you do need to hear the hissing sound for at least 20 seconds. When you're attaching oxygen tubing to the mask, please ensure that you have the correct fit, so the tubing doesn't fall off. So take extra care when cutting the bubble tubing, that it's not too big or too small. If possible, use the single-use pre-packed tubing, as this will ensure that the tubing is free from contaminants and the correct size. However, you are then restricted as to the length of the tubing. So if you do use the green bubble tubing, please do not cut from the long roll and hang it over the flow meter just in case. Cut it at the time of need. Here is a table which shows you how long a CD oxygen cylinder will last, if it's full, half full or quarter full. So if your patient is on 2 litres per minute and the cylinder is quarter full and they need to go to the toilet, it is probably going to last long enough. However, if your patient is on 15 litres per minute with a full cylinder and they need to go for a CT scan, for example, it's only going to last 30 minutes. So you need to plan your journey. Do you need to get more than one cylinder? Is there piped oxygen where your patient's going? Planning ahead will ensure that your patient does not run out of oxygen. These are similar tables which show you how long an F and an HX cylinder lasts. These are the cylinders that you will see normally at the bottom of patient movement trolleys. Remember, these large cylinders are not designed to go on a bed. Do remember that cylinders will only last for a certain amount of time. A MYTT Oxygen cylinder, if it's full and running at 15 litres per minute, will last 30 minutes. Piped oxygen, however, from one tank at 15 litres will last 2 years. So please ensure that if piped oxygen is available, it's used as a priority. Who does what? The prescriber will prescribe the oxygen with target saturation range. They will also state the starting device and starting rate. They will advise whether oxygen needs to be increased, and if so, adjust the prescription. The registrant administers the oxygen, ensuring that the target saturations are quickly achieved. They titrate the oxygen and document in the patient's notes that they are on oxygen therapy. They also sign the drug chart. The healthcare student or AP monitor the patient by doing a saturation level and record this in the patient's notes. And they report to the registrant if the patient is out of range. They do not start or alter the oxygen flow rate, but can put the oxygen mask back on the patient if the oxygen has not been switched off. The porters will bring cylinders to your clinical area. They can remove the tamper evidence seal, connect the regulator and activate the cylinder, but they cannot start or alter the flow rate. The trust only has a certain number of gas cylinders. The HTMO 201 states that clinical areas should not store cylinders. If there is a definite requirement for local storage, they should only have what's required for a 24-hour period. That storage area should be behind a locked door, which has controlled access. Nothing else can be stored in that room, and cylinders must be in appropriate racking. Do remember that small cylinders are for patient transfer and emergency backup use only. If you need cylinders for a patient transfer, ask porters when booking and they will bring one. Inappropriately stored cylinders can mean the gas store becomes empty and porters have to walk the wards to find cylinders, which can delay patient treatment. Here are some appropriately stored medical gas cylinders. Here are some cylinders that are not stored correctly within mid-Yorks. Do you recognise any of these areas? Within our trust there have been incidents where patients have been harmed because oxygen cylinders weren't used properly, piped oxygen was not used when it was available, and air was used instead of oxygen. If a flow meter breaks in the terminal unit, try and remove the flow meter by pressing the outside of the collar to see if the broken bit will expel. If there's gas escaping from the terminal unit, try putting a flow meter in, as this may plug it temporarily until it can be fixed. If you cannot fix it temporarily, then the gas needs to be isolated. Urgently contact estates, move the patients to another area, open a window to improve ventilation, but make sure that your manager knows what's happening. And do remember that medical oxygen is a drug. It must always be prescribed and signed for at all drug rounds.